So here in the Acts of the Apostles, that some of the brothers came and said, unless you follow these works of the law, you will not be saved. You cannot be saved. And then we hear how the apostles solved this problem. And for us, it might sound like they're saying, no, you don't have to follow all these things. You just have to follow these things. But it's deeper than that, what's going on. The Jews understood that it was the works of the law that made one righteous and so allowed one to be saved. But Paul especially, and the rest of the Christians too, but Paul articulates it probably better than anyone. Paul understands that it's not what we do that saves us, it's what Christ did that saves us. We're saved by Christ's paschal mystery. And it doesn't matter what we do, we cannot earn salvation, right? The Jews understood you earned it by the works of the law. Christians came to see you cannot earn salvation. It's a free gift given by God, and we come to salvation through Jesus Christ. Now, it doesn't mean that there are no commandments to follow, right? Jesus himself gave us commandments, and Jesus talked about the commandments and following them. Remember, the young man comes to him and says, what must I do to eternal life? And Jesus talks first about the commandments. But it's not the commandments themselves that bring us life. Right? It's Jesus. And so what do? Are we doing Jesus' commandments so that he'll like us and so that he'll let us in? You know, that's kind of the next step, you might say. And unfortunately, it's an idea that Christians have. I remember thinking that way. That was the way it was growing up, and I never really heard anyone tell me differently. And I know a lot of Christians, and it's kind of tempting, you know, because the idea that salvation is completely free is hard for us to grasp. I think mostly because we have a hard time grasping, we have a hard time loving that way ourselves, and so we have a hard time understanding that kind of love. But it's still not enough. I remember having this conversation. It was a strange conversation. It was with a bunch of people around. It was mostly men. Actually, now I think about it, it was all men. And this is some years ago. And one of them was very, what's the word I want? I can't think of the word. When you don't like something, opposed. He's very opposed to the faith, especially to Catholics. And he was getting more and more obnoxious. I don't know, right? Where you contentious, a little more and more contentious. And finally, he said something about commandments and this and that and the other, you know. And I asked him, I said, would you ever have an affair? Would you ever? And he looked at me and he said, no. I said, why not? He said, my wife would divorce me like that, you know. And a guy a couple down said, divorce me? My wife would kill me. And I said, anybody else? You know, of course, nobody's going to admit to that in public, but my point was not whether or not they do it, but why they wouldn't do it. And then finally one of them says, but you know what, I wouldn't want to hurt her. And I looked around and I said, really, you guys, this is all that you can come up with? I said, no one can answer, no, I love her, I wouldn't even dream of it. I love her too much. You know, they looked at her, they kind of, I don't know, partly embarrassed, partly whatever, you know. And this is what we talk about with God. We always say, okay, I don't want to sin because God will zap me. You know, that's that level or something. You know, and when we get better as you go up, well, no, it's not good to do these things. Or, no, it's good. But the high level, what Jesus really wants is, he says, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. In other words, we think somehow too often that following the commands comes first, and then, you know, and there's something to that. It does help a little, you know. It's hard to come to love God deeply if you're continually sinning. You know. But Jesus puts it the other way. That love comes first. Do you love me? Remember, he says to Peter 3 times, do you love me? Peter says, yes, I do. And then he says, feed my sheep. Do you love me? Yes. Okay, then do this. Do you love me? Yes. All right, do this. And really, what we need to talk about more and more, I think, is the love that God has for us, and the love that we then will have for God in return. And the point of all this is that we grow in love of God. And at the beginning of this Mass, we talked about the responsibility of parents, right? To raise your child in the faith. And it doesn't mean, it does mean partly, teach him what's good and bad, what's good to do, what's not. Teach him what's right and what's wrong, right? Teach him what things will bring him closer to God and what will bring him further away from him. But ultimately, what it really means is teach him to love God. And here's the thing, you know, we say this is a philosophical maxim, you can't give what you don't have. And so implied in the responsibility of raising a child in the faith is that you yourselves continue to grow more and more in love with God. And I understand it's the same for me. I think, how am I going to lead my parish into deeper love of God if I'm not myself striving for that? And so, really, that's the hardest part of raising in the faith, is that you yourselves grow in faith. Especially that you yourselves come to know more and more God's love for you, and then come to love God more and more yourselves, and then you've got something really to give him the hand on.